Captain America Brave New World premiered globally last week, soaring to the top of the Valentine's Day and President's Day weekend box office with a $192.4 million haul in tow. The Anthony Mackie-led vehicle, which is the fourth Captain America film and the 35th MCU film overall, managed to exceed somewhat meager box office projections. However, its reception with both critics and audiences isn't as definitive a victory. The film is currently sitting at 51% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, that's the critic score, and has earned a B CinemaScore, which is among some franchise lows for Marvel. This film and its long, drawn-out production have been the source of many conversations for us here, but what do we think now that we have taken our first breaths in this brave new world Marvel has concocted?
Yeah, cards on the table. I have not seen Brave New World yet.
Fake fan.
Hey. Had a busy weekend. The road to my theater was literally flooded for a day. And,
so many excuses.
Just haven't been there yet. But I am not going to, talk about what I thought about the movie because I haven't seen it yet. But I can talk about the numbers that came in for the movie. And I think, they turned out sort of what we expected, right? This was the projections in the weeks leading up that it would do somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million worldwide, and it hit about 192. So, it's kind of what you expect. It's definitely not the lowest opening for an MCU movie by any stretch of the imagination. It is in the bottom half, but it's not at lowest when you compare to other ones. I think when you look at this one, if you're thinking about the future of the box office for it, there's a couple different things you got to think about. Like, I think you kind of have to look back to Quantumania. Quantumania opened over President's Day weekend, same time, opened to about $20 or so million more worldwide, so had a little bit stronger opening than Captain America. And then that movie ended up kind of falling off. And its second weekend, it dropped by 70%, and it ended up pulling up, I think, somewhere around 476 million worldwide, which, that's whenever we start labeling an MCU movie with the F word, flop, right? We start saying, like, well, it didn't make back its budget or whatever, and it was a failure, and now the character may or may not appear in the future, and we start talking about that. And so I think if you're looking at Captain America, and you're Disney, you really like it to end somewhere with a 6 in front of its worldwide number, or even a 7. I don't know if it can get there after this particular jump out the gate. You'd want it to have more of a higher debut, because one of the trends with these MCU movies is they have been, at least since Endgame, sort of dropping off in their second weekends. I looked it up before we started. Thor: Love and Thunder dropped 67%. So did Multiverse of Madness. Ant-Man dropped 70%, and the Marvels dropped 78%. So it has been a problem a little bit for Marvel movies. But I think if we're looking at it and we're looking at that B- CinemaScore, that is the lowest CinemaScore for an MCU movie ever. And that's, if you're just looking at that and using it as predictive, which what it is, that doesn't bode well for the general box office of the movie, right? And you got to remember, the CinemaScore, it's not indicative of the quality of a movie. That's not what it's for. It's not rating the movie. It's not like a Rotten Tomatoes score. The CinemaScore is a measure of its box office longevity. So it's exit polls and it's data that's collected around a movie, and then they're projecting, all right, well, it's going to have this much staying power in its coming weeks after its opening weekend. So typically franchise movies kind of get an A in their sleep. So to get a B-, what that tells you is that at least the industry is expecting that this movie will take a pretty steep drop in its following weekends. So I think, all that being said, if you're looking for reasons to be positive, you liked the movie, you like the MCU, you're like, tell me a reason to be happy about the movie. Well, if you liked it, then I think you should be happy. But looking at the box office in general, it's got an 80% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. I know you said the 51%, that's the critic score. The audience score is 80, so that tells you that people are going and saying that they like it online. Demographically, it was pretty diverse in terms of ticket sales, so that's good. It appeals to a lot of different people. And then I think if you want to look at a model and be like, it should be like this, or hopefully it's like this, you want to look at something like Mufasa. Mufasa opened to like 120 million worldwide or something. Did not have a great opening, but it steadily grew, and now it's still in theaters. It's sniffing 700 million worldwide. It just had this slow growth over weeks and weeks and weeks. So can Captain America do that? I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I think when you're looking at these numbers, You got all this discourse online. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a flop? Is this solid? I don't think it's either of those. I think it's just somewhere in the middle. It's kind of average for an MCU movie. It's a little bit on the lower end, but it has potential to grow over the weeks if word of mouth is strong on it.
I think you bury the lead a little bit where we don't say that this is the second highest opening for a Captain America movie, and the first was Civil War. And I think that's notable because this is a solo-led movie. In theory, yes, it's an ensemble cast, but I think for all of the things that have been talked about this movie, that's a really important thing to point out. And if the drop-off happens, the drop-off happens, but it seems like generally audiences liked it. And like my theater was pretty full at a primetime showing Friday night. There were tons of people in the lobby. Like they were showing it in so many different theaters. I think that I hope it will have growth or at least steady box office growth because, it deserves it in my opinion. But yeah, I don't know. I don't like all the discourse around it that's negative, I guess.
One of the things that makes me think of, looking back, one of the things that was I saw this week is it had the highest opening night, or the second highest opening night of any Captain America film, which just is kind of because the MCU changed over time. Like in the early days, I'm looking at like First Avenger was in like the $300 million range, the 300 and something. And it's like, you think about the sort of ebb and flow of the MCU and how it did hit humongous heights for like phase 3. But where it started in phases 1 and 2, it was not always hitting $1 billion. And so I'm wondering if we're in that lull phase, we're still have this franchise that's hitting the numbers it was hitting in the beginning. It still can build momentum. If it just has a couple great movies in a row, it can build that momentum and be back on top and have another experience like an Endgame. It's just, I think it's literally been a rebuilding phase. I think they've taken a little long with that. I think they did a bad job of planning out phases 4 through 6. Even if I've liked all the properties, I think the planning's been poor, and the release schedule. But, there's still a lot of hope when you think about like it's still making money that it used to make in phases 1 and 2. Like it's not terrible. These aren't terrible numbers for a movie to do. But it does probably mean they're going to have to get the budgets under control if they're going to realize they're in a phase like that, and they need the budgets to match the take they're going to bring in.
Yeah, well, I know you brought up Winter Soldier. Winter Soldier had a pretty low, Haley, you mentioned it had a pretty low box office in opening weekend, and that is true.
I brought up Civil War because the comparison is Civil War.
Low isn't the right word. I think I meant like behind what this movie did, But it ended right around north of $700 million worldwide. And so I think like Winter Soldier is a blueprint of kind of what you're talking about, Matt. Like these movies back in the day, at least, they didn't have these like smash box office opening weekends sometimes. Sometimes they had a little bit more muted by today's standards, but then they did grow over time. So Winter Soldier, it popped into the theaters, had an okay box office, but then it had really strong word of mouth. It got really good reviews, and then people started seeing it in its second, third, fourth, fifth weekends. And it really like drove, kind of like Mufasa, like we just said, like it just kind of kept stacking these like solid weekend after solid weekend. So, this one doesn't have the critic score behind it that Winter Soldier had, which I don't know how much that matters at the end of the day. But still, the possibility is there that these movies can have these like not explosion, opening weekends and still like get to the end and you're like, oh, that movie made that? Oh, it's pretty good, or whatever by the time it's all said and done.
Yeah. I've seen the movie twice and I've had some time to mull over it. And I think my take on this movie is the same as it was coming out of the theater. It's a really solid, fun movie. Is it perfect? No. Does it have some obvious flaws? Yes, it does. But I think it's just a solid, entertaining movie, a great vehicle for Anthony Mackie. Some of the action sequences and choreography were really thrilling. So it's interesting, like the whole lead up to this movie, I was the one with hesitation and reservations, and to come out on the other side, I'm with you, Haley. I've kind of found the discourse around this movie to be really deflating. And I'm like trying to check myself because everybody's entitled to their own opinion, sure. But I really feel like I've almost had to like come to the defense of this movie, and it's become a lot more apparent to me, the shifting narrative, and it really does feel like people just kind of have their like teeth out and claws out for this thing. Because Jet, you talked about the projections, and the projections were adjusted. Like in the couple of weeks before, we were talking about like 80 million. So really, when you thought this movie was going to come in at 80 million and it does 100 million, that's actually $20 million better than what people were expecting. And to compare that to, Matt, you made some great points about like phase 1 and phase 2. Like I immediately thought of summer 2015 again with Ant-Man. And if I'm not mistaken, Ant-Man only made like 65, maybe 85 million tops. The first Doctor Strange, very similar. So we were just at a point in the MCU where we were willing to give new characters a chance and give them a chance, pardon the pun here, a chance to spread their wings. And it's just like,
yeah,
I've gotten really just tired of the conversation, just like Marvel's back, Marvel's dead, Marvel's back, Marvel's dead. We just had a $1 billion grossing movie last summer, and people are really excited for Daredevil, for Thunderbolts, for the Fantastic Four. So just take it in stride, give this movie a chance, just kind of like check yourself and maybe, where you're coming from. And yeah, like I said, I don't think everybody that doesn't like this movie is necessarily have, nefarious intentions or anything like that. But I really do feel like this movie, just like for whatever reason, people are gunning for it, and it feels unfairly so.
Well, there's a dogpile effect with this kind of stuff. I mean, if somebody already has a disposition to not like a franchise or not like, for whatever reason, maybe a movie or a show or something in a franchise, and then there's even like the slightest crack of this might be an issue with the movie or this might be a production issue or whatever, then it does sort of open the door for like the airing of the grievances. It can kind of turn into like, well, maybe somebody hasn't really cared about the franchise in a while, but they see the door open for an opportunity to hate on it, and it's like, dive in, So that kind of stuff, I think, there's kind of that little bit of like that whipping up a little bit that can happen sometimes.
And I'm self-aware enough to know that like I just don't have to pay attention to it, and then it won't bother me, right? But I see outlets like IGN saying this is rock bottom for the MCU. Again, it's all subjective. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But for my purposes, to say that this movie is worse than Love and Thunder, what are you smoking? Like, in no world is this movie worse than Love and Thunder, and a few other ones.
I think one thing that is also causing some misconsternation is the fact that we're comparing it to Captain America movies, which are one of the most beloved, through lines of the entire saga here. And if you compare this, it's a weird thing because it is the first Sam Wilson Captain America movie, but it is the fourth Captain America movie. So it's like this thing of like, he's just getting his start. We're just learning who this character is. They may do really interesting things with the next one. I think Winter Soldier is everyone's, a lot of people's favorite Marvel movie, or like a really beloved Marvel movie.
Sure.
And, it wasn't until the second one that really got there, And I think that it's tough. This is the first time we've really seen someone step into the shoes of someone else, take on the mantle, and those comparisons don't do any favors, to someone trying to get their footing. It's the first outing. We did a big cast on Monday that dropped on Tuesday, and today. Today's been long, but it's I have my problems with the movie,
Sure.
and the more I sit with it, I have some like kind of major problems with the movie, but it is nowhere near the worst Marvel movie or like a bad Marvel movie. It has its issues. I think they made some decisions in the writing of this movie to accommodate kind of changes that happened, and we know they did that, but also like actors, I think they accommodated Harrison Ford a little too much is my take on this movie. And I can go into depth with that when we get to somewhere where we can talk spoilers, but I think that's a little, and it makes me sad because I think they had a different plan that was more interesting and more novel, and you can tell by the early release stuff and the later release stuff, like the things they changed and took out of the trailers, that there's just some changes that were made. And I think the movie holds together really well, really seamless. Like I did not get that Falcon Winter Soldier feeling where I was like, oh, there's the thing, there's this thread they dropped. Like that, they did a really good job editing this thing together. But they clearly made some changes, and I think it had more to do with things outside of the universe rather than like artistic decisions. And I think that some of that made the movie not stand out like it could if it had been a little more bold with its creative decisions.
I think to say that this was a character starting out movie is a disservice to Anthony Mackie's portrayal of Sam Wilson. He's done a lot of work to be this character.
Sure.
And he does it really well, in my opinion. So I think he carried the movie well, and it was very serious in tone, which I wasn't expecting. And it was very emotional. Like I said on our source pages review and comparison, like I cried 3 or 4 times watching this movie. So I think it's just different strokes for different folks, but don't write it off just because of XYZ.
Yeah, for sure.
You always have to remember too, whenever we talk numbers and box office and all that type of stuff, like it is just numbers, at the end of the day, but we're also comparing Marvel to Marvel a lot of times. Like Marvel has kind of ascended to be a new thing. And so we've kind of talked about this a little bit here and there, but yeah, it's that idea of, okay, well, this is a low Marvel box office, but then you compare it to another movie and you're like, well, if you compare it to an average sort of, movie that's even a franchise movie, you're like, oh, well, this one looks pretty good compared to that, if we're having a conversation of $200 million in its opening weekend as being low. Now is the budget too high on this movie and movies and made by Marvel in general? Probably, but that's something that you can control and you can discuss and you can fix later on. Like that's something that doesn't always have to be the case. But yeah, you always got to remember that in the back of your mind. You're comparing Marvel to Marvel most of the time. It's not. Sometimes we can get bogged down with that of saying, well, this movie, has a low MCU opening, but a low MCU opening a lot of times, if the budget's low, is still a pretty high opening compared to other movies and other franchises.
There are, I just wanted to know, there are $54 billion movies. 54 movies have crossed $1 billion. 11 of them have been Marvel movies. It's like, that's just insane. A third of their movies have crossed into like the highest 54 movies of all time. That's just a lot.
It's unprecedented.
Oh, 100%. It's the most successful franchise of all time. And you can't expect them all to make $1 billion. And this is a good number for this movie. And to speak to what you said, Haley, I didn't mean to say it's his first time as a character, but it's his first solo outing. It's his first time standing up on his own as a character in a movie, being the central figure in a movie, which is just a different thing. He's been a sidekick up until now, I think. And that's just what it is. I like this movie. I really do. But it's got its issues, and I'm glad people are enjoying it, though. You just watched a clip from Multiverse News. If you liked it, go to our channel. We got a whole episode that it comes from, so go check that out. And hit the like and subscribe, and we got lots of clips you'll enjoy, but also full hour-long episodes of Multiverse News with lots of things that don't even make it to clips. So check us out.
You stay clippy.